Hi there, I'm Brian with MustangSteve. Today I'm going to show you how to install our rear brake kit. It applies to all Mustangs from 64 to 73. We offer a small rear bearing kit and a large rear bearing kit, depending on which rear axle you have. It also fits a lot of other classic Fords. Today we're going to be installing these rear disc brakes off of a 2015 to 2023 Mustang GT Performance Pack. We'll be installing them on my 68 Mustang here, which is the MustangSteve test mule. We used it to try out parts and develop new parts on. We want to jack up the car and put jack stands under it. Then we're going to take off the wheel and get to work. Here are some of the tools I'm going to be using for the job today. Got a slide hammer, an axle puller, a rear caliper tool, and an axle bearing remover tool, which we'll use to remove the existing grease seal. You don't have to go out and buy these. I actually borrowed them from AutoZone. You put a deposit, and then when you're done, you take them back and get a full refund. I also have a new bearing, new brake pads, new seal. I'm going to be using AN fittings on this install. So I have an AN line and an AN banjo fitting. Here's the MustangSteve parts, the brackets and all the bolts, and the rotor centering ring. I also have the longer studs. This does widen the track by about 0.25 inches or a quarter inch. So you need to take that in consideration. We've also got impact driver, not necessary if you have a torque wrench or a breaker bar, various sockets, a couple hammers, pliers. I have disc brake tools. I have drum brake tools that make the removal much easier of the old drum brakes. Normally you'd want to break the lug nuts while it's on the ground. I've already done that, so I'm just going to be taking the lug nuts off. You'll notice that I'm running a wheel spacer around these modern wheels. It's not something that we recommend, but it's something that's done on this car to run these wheels. So let's go ahead and take that off. Now that we've got the wheel off, the next thing I'm going to do is take the drum off. It may just pull off like this. If not, you may have to tap it a bit. So one of the reasons that the track width increases by a quarter of an inch is this is actually very thin. And the new rotor is a quarter of an inch thicker, so it's going to increase the track width on each side. Okay, the next step here is to remove the bearing. So there are 4 bolts that are behind, and that's what this hole is here for. So you're going to want to have both sides of your rear axle up in the air so you can turn this, or one side and then have your car in neutral. And then you're just going to rotate that hole so that you can get to the access to the next bearing. Okay, now we're going to rotate this to the next hole. And finally, the last hole here. We'll set these aside. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to pull the rear bearing out. So it's, actually look at that, didn't even need the slide hammer on this side. Normally you would need the slide hammer to be able to pull it out. What this tells us is that the bearing is probably very worn, and it's moist in here, so we've got a brake fluid leak, and the bearing seal has leaked as well. So it's all kind of mess in here. So this is perfect timing to be replacing all of this. So what we're going to have to do, there's actually a lot of rust and corrosion there, and to clean it out, we're going to remove the bearing and the bearing keeper here as well. We'll be replacing this with the MustangSteve bracket. Make sure and install the MustangSteve bracket before you put your new bearing on. Otherwise, you'll be pulling it right back off. I'm going to be doing the bearing swap off camera. I will be using my hydraulic press to do it. There's lots of videos on the internet where you can use a cutoff wheel and notch both sides of the bearing and then tap it and it will split open to slide it off. So this is where my brake tools are going to come in handy to get this disassembled. So we've got lots of springs here and the keepers on the side. So we've got a tool here to take off the spring. Notice also I'm wearing safety glasses. Okay. These you push in and just do a quarter of a turn, they come right off. Okay, this is the parking brake lever here. So we can take and then this will all kind of fall apart from here. This is the parking brake cable here. We will actually be selling an aftermarket parking brake cable kit that allows you to hook up the new style parking brakes with your new rear calipers. The other thing you're going to want to do is remove the hose off your cylinder here. I just use the tub to catch the brake fluid. This is actually easier to do before you take it off, but okay. So I'm actually going to be removing the brake line since I'm going to be using AN fittings. We will also offer a fitting for this that will go into the factory brake line on the new brakes, which is an M10 by 1.5 fitting. You can actually take this fitting, cut this fitting off, and then put a new fitting on that will match the existing brake fitting. Now we also need to pull the seal out, and so that's what the axle bearing remover kit works. So you put it in there and then turn it sideways and then use the slide hammer. So we'll go ahead and do this. And that's what the old axle seal looks like. So one of the reasons to do this conversion, if drum brakes are properly maintained, they actually work quite well. There's a lot of moving parts to them, and they do need adjustment or it'll pull side to side and there's other issues. So with the disc brakes, it makes a much simpler, better mechanical advantage over drum brakes. So actually I am going to show you this bearing separator. I got this from Harbor Freight. It was pretty affordable. You can also rent one where you rent tools. So I've got it just on the bearing keeper right now, and we'll take that off first and then we'll separate the bearing. So you can see it's already starting to separate the bearing. You can actually use a slide hammer as well. We're done with the axle bearing remover tool. So I'm going to use my hydraulic press on this and I'll be back. Okay, we're back here with our axle. As you can see, I removed the bearing. There's lots of videos on how to remove the bearing online on YouTube. The one thing they all say is do not nick the axle. So guess what I did? I nicked the axle. But that's going to be okay. We've got our bearing seal. As long as the part that the seal is against is not against the nicked part, which it may be, then we won't have an issue. Next, I'm going to remove these studs. You can see the factory studs are really thin because that brake drum has such thin metal, and the disc brake is about 1/4 inch thicker. So we're going to take these out and put in longer studs next. And we'll do that on the off camera. I'll use the hydraulic press and get the bearings on as well. When you're installing this rear bracket, there's one thing to remember. Actually, a couple things. You always want to put it on before you put the new bearing on. Guess what I did? Yep, forgot the bracket. Had to take the bearing back off. Notice there's a machined pocket in the bracket, and that's designed so the bearing fits in there. If your bearing does not fit snugly in the bracket pocket, you either have the wrong bearing or the wrong bracket. Okay, we're back here with our axle. Now that we've got the new bearing keeper, and the new bracket on there, you're going to want to make sure and clean this surface very well, because that's where the rotor is going to sit, and you want it to sit flat. So next, I'm going to install the grease seal. So it needs to go facing outward. There's other videos on installing that as well. We're going to clean up in here first, especially because we all that oil leaking out with the old worn out grease seal. And also on this surface here, if there's any leftover gasket material, you want to make sure and get that off as well. You'll be reusing these studs, so make sure and keep those handy. Okay. I recommend using a grease seal installer. I'm going to use a socket because that's what I've got. Make sure that it's flush all the way around. Okay, so that's in all the way. Next thing you're going to want to do is put the axle in. You can also lube that up as well. But with the axle, you're going to have to kind of wiggle it around so you get it back into the carrier. That wasn't too difficult there. On the brackets, on the bracket that goes over the bearing, there's a left and a right on some kits, and it will have an L or an R on it, letting you know which side it goes on. So it will only bolt up one way. So if you get them on the wrong side, your calipers will be angled the other way. But if you get on the right side, the bolts will only go in one way. Otherwise, the caliper will be on the bottom in order for it to be on the top. We're going to use those nuts from earlier. And we're going to use the same socket from before, only this time to tighten them. Now the way those studs are designed is they won't spin from the back because they've got a square head that goes up against the axle. I like to do them diagonally to load the bearing evenly. and look up the factory specs for your axle and your bearing to know how much to torque it to. Okay, so now this is all installed. Now the next step is to put on the second bracket. And so with the kit, it actually comes with two of these spacers. Now it's not required. This is the 2015 GT 2015 kit. These aren't required on all, so you may not need them. You'll just have to check the spacing for your caliper bracket. So we are going to need a ring to center the rotor. This is just a soft mallet. You're going to want to tap that down. You can use a blunt object to drive it down. So I'm going to use a punch to knock it down. And this is why also having the hub surface clean is important to be able to push this centering ring all the way back. Okay, next we're going to install the bracket. So it goes like this, and the bolts are going to come from the back forward. And these are self-locking lock nuts. We also recommend using Loctite. I'm using 3/4 inch wrenches here. So now that that's on, the next thing we're going to do is install the caliper bracket. So when you're working with a used caliper, there's new calipers available that are very affordable. When you're working with the used one, you want to take apart the sliding pins and grease them. Just for everybody's peace of mind, I did pull out the axle and repair the nick that I made. It wasn't quite on the sealing surface, but it was very close, so I repaired that. We're going to carry on with installing the rear brakes. So the next thing we're going to want to do here is put on the rotor. So you saw that I installed the centering ring. This is not required on the large bearing kit, just on the small rear bearing kit. And what that does is make sure that the rotor is centered, so it's hub centric. And it fits pretty snugly, so you may actually have to tap it on to get it initially on there. And then a lot of times you can use lug nuts to hold it on if needed, or to cinch it down all the way. It's really just to tighten it up. You don't need to put them all on there. Okay, and it's pretty well flush. Maybe offset just a little bit. It's pretty well flush there. So then the next thing we're going to do is install the bracket. Go ahead and pull off these clips here, the pad clips. The new pads came with new clips, so we don't need these anymore. Okay, so here's the new clips. And you can actually grease in the clips for the pads to slide if you need. There's different recommendations on that, and these just snap in. This is the other thing you'll notice about when you're servicing a disc brake versus a drum brake, that so many fewer parts, so much easier to surface. It's self-adjusting. It's just much easier to maintain. Okay, so now that I've got this done, I'm going to position it with the bracket. And so the other bolts were 3/4. The bolts between the two brackets, these are actually 18 millimeter because they go into the caliper and the caliper is metric. So now at this point that this is bolted on, there should be no interference between the rotor and the caliper bracket. If there's any interference, then you either need to use the spacers or you need to check and make sure that the rotor is fully seated. My rotor is still not completely seated here, so I'm going to add another lug nut and tighten it up a little bit more. And now you can tell that there's no clearance issues and it's ready to go. Okay, so the next step is going to be to put on the pads. So we want to clean the rotor. So I'll use a little bit of brake clean. See, even that, there's a little bit of grease on it. Even if you have new rotors and you've touched them with greasy gloves, you're going to want to make sure and clean the rotors. Okay, next we're going to put the brake pads in. And again, you can grease either the back sides or on the slides. This is a wear bar to show you when it's worn. What I read online is you want to have it on the leading edge, generally on the back, so it's not as visible. So the leading edge means that when you're driving, the wheel turns like this. So this is going to be the first edge that will come in contact with the rotor. So that's the leading edge. So on the back, this is going to be on the lower, on this side. So to get these, they go in pretty easy. You just have to push them a little bit. Just like that. If it doesn't go easy, something's wrong. Okay, so that is good. Now the next thing we do to mount this is we have the screws that we loosened earlier. But before we do this, if you're using a used caliper, you're going to need to open up this section in here to make room for the new brake pads or new rotor. So for that, we're going to use a special tool that we got that we borrowed from AutoZone. And it's this tool right here. And on these rotors, I don't know if you can see on camera, but they actually have grooves cut in them. So you can't just use a clamp on this. It's designed, because it has an emergency brake, it's designed to twist to go in. So it's important when you're compressing this that you do it that way. So this is designed where you loosen the nut and then it should fit in there. Should fit in the grooves. And then you want to back the nut out. Now when you do this, it's going to squirt out brake fluid. It didn't need a whole lot on this one. And then it's flush. And now that's going to fit over the pads there. As I mentioned, I'm going to use AN fittings on mine. We're going to also offer a brake nut that you can use your existing brake lines, put the new nut on, and be able to screw the M10 by 1.5 directly on your brake line. And we'll have a bracket as well to attach it to your axle. So to do the AN fitting, I'm going to remove, this is a banjo bolt. So the fittings are a little different on these as well. And there's going to be brake fluid that will come out of this as well. So with the banjo bolt, you have these, basically a bolt that allows brake fluid to flow through the middle, and it's a totally different type of fitting than the traditional brake fittings. It comes with copper washers. You're going to want to replace these anytime you're replacing the banjo fitting. You want to replace the copper washers. So here's the AN adapter that I'm going to be using. And we'll be offering these type of fittings on the MustangSteve site soon. So the banjo bolt will go through that, and then the AN line will bolt directly to that. And then you'll just angle it so that the angle of the hose fits with where the axle is and where it's going to go to the axle. Okay, so we've got our copper washers on here. Put it through like that, put the copper washer on the bottom. And then we're going to tighten that. You can actually wait to tighten it till we get it in the car so that way we can get the angle right for this fitting. You can see that's what it looks like. So now that we've got this all ready to go, the next step is simply to put these on the 2 caliper slides on the back. You want to make sure that either they move freely or you take them apart and clean them and put new grease on them. So they actually don't look terrible. One other thing, you'll notice that one of them has the rubber tip on it. That's also going to go on the leading edge, and that helps reduce vibration. So if you get them mixed up for some reason, this one goes on the leading edge, which again is the side of the brake caliper where the rotor first hits. So it's pretty straightforward, so just wipe the grease off. You can even use some brake clean if needed. Mainly because if there's any grit in there, then that's going to affect the surface of the sliding, and you want it to slide in and out very easily. I'm just going to put some of... You don't need a ton of grease on there. Just want to make sure they're coated thoroughly. And this grease is specifically designed for brakes. I overdid that one a little bit, but it'll be fine. And you want to make sure that the rubber boot, it's got a little groove. You want to make sure the rubber boot is over the groove in the pin. That way, as it slides in and out, the pin is not exposed to the elements at all. Okay, then the next step is to put the caliper on. And that's basically it. You take obviously those lugs off, and then you put your wheel on, and that's what it looks like. It's pretty straightforward. These are actually used brakes that I got with a set of Brembo 6-piston caliper brakes. I've seen these calipers for about $50 used, so they're fairly affordable. And then the rotors are around $100. So the total cost of this kit is well below some of the aftermarket kits. Only you're using Ford parts, so you can get Ford rotors, Ford calipers, and then you've got lots of options as well for the brake pads. You're not limited to one brand. Lots of aftermarket options if you want some more performance out of it. Anyway, it ends up being a pretty good overall upgrade. You add some reliability, and you simplify it. One other thing to know is that if your master cylinder, which it should be if you had drum brakes on here, is designed for drum brakes and it's got a residual valve, meaning that it holds a little more pressure. And generally, you'll have to get either a new master cylinder or remove that valve. And in some cases, it could be an external valve. We also sell proportioning valves, which allow you to adjust the proportion of pressure between the front and rear. And what that'll allow you to do is to dial in your rear so that your front or your rear don't lock up first, that they apply pressure together. Anyway, so that's the job. Probably took a few hours total. The bearing replacement is probably the hardest part of this. The rest of this all fairly well bolts together. Also, don't forget to bleed your brakes and check them before you need to make an emergency stop. Like, comment, and subscribe. Please follow our channel. Comment if you have any questions, any other videos you'd like to see, and that helps support our channel. Thanks for watching this video.